Hello and welcome to my review of the Darksword Armory mid-13th century sword. This sword is a transitional sword in the battle between offense and defense, the arms race of the time between armor and a weapon to be effective against armor. This sword marked a transition from the swords in the Viking Age and previous that had wide blades, very little taper, fullers that ran most of the length of the blade, and grips which barely fit the hand. This sword was a transition in that a sword was needed that could be effective not only in the cut, which was still the primary method of using a sword, but that could also be effective in the thrust. And this sword saw many changes from the previous era, and the ones that are most obvious are the blade tapering to a point, a shortening of the fuller, a lengthening of the guard, and the grip becoming much better. These were all effective in making the sword better at thrusting, being able to find gaps in what would begin to become plate armor going down the road, but also being able to find their way through chainmail and still be effective at cutting. The broad base of the sword, the point of balance, made it effective cutter. But the flattening of the blade without a fuller, the lengthening of the guard, made the sword more effective at being able to be controlled from using the point to thrust. Later on, of course, we move up to a different sword a couple of generations later, and you can see this one tapers to a very fine point because there was more of a need for thrusting than there was a need for cutting. You still needed to do some cutting because not everyone was going to be armored to the hilt, but you needed to be able to find gaps in plate armor and be able to be effective at breaking the chains in the chainmail, and these fine, very fine points would do that. So when you look at this sword, you can see it's a bit of a compromise between those two other blades where it's effective at being able to do both. This sword is an Oakeshott Type XII sword, and to quote Oakeshott, the Type XII, evenly tapering blade, generally with a good sharp point and tending to widen from below the guard, with a well-defined fuller that extended from 2/3 to 3/4 the length of the blade. The cross-section will be lenticular, and the whole sword would be about 30 inches in length. This sword was viewed to be popular both from a perspective of the number of blades which have been found and the artwork of the time, from about 1150 to about 1350, so for a good long period of time. And as I said, the Type XII was really a transitional blade, a very versatile blade that could be used with a shield, it could be used on foot, it could be used mounted, it could be used to cut, and it could be used to thrust, so a very flexible blade. This Darksword Armory 13th century blade is a really good example of that Oakeshott Type XII blade. The blade is made from 1560 high carbon steel, and it's been dual tempered. The blade itself is 27.5 inches long. It's got a fuller that runs 2/3 the length of the blade. It's 2.5 inches wide at its thickest up here by the hilt, and it tapers to a blade which is an effective blade for thrusting. Overall, the sword is 34.5 inches long. The cross-section, as I said below, was something which was effective at making this good for thrusting as well as the traditional cut. The hilt of the blade is 7 inches long, and the fittings are made from mild steel. The guard is an Oakeshott Type or Style 10, but it does have elements of both the Style 2 and 5 guard. The key aspects of this and are not really typical, but the quillion tapers down towards the guard rather than away from the guard, and that's really something which defines the Style 10. X. The elements of the Style 2 and 5 guard really have to do with the flat and rounded edges and end of the guard. The guard itself is 8 inches long. The grip is 4 3/4 inches long. It is made from wood wrapped in leather. And as you can see, it has these pronounced ridges at either end and 3 in the middle. Makes for a very nice, comfortable grip. The grip is glued at the edge, and the seam is quite well done. You can see there is a seam there, but it's a very exact fit. The pommel of the sword is an Oakeshott Type D pommel, frequently called a cocked hat pommel. Obviously, it wasn't called that at the time because the cocked hat was something which came later on and is more frequently associated with Nelson and the sea battles at Trafalgar and that time period. The pommel has good heft to it. It makes the sword very effective from a balancing point of view and really helps to control the tip for thrusting. It is in itself a very effective weapon, and the weight is very good for using to deliver a blow to someone at close quarters. Overall, I think this sword is a really good example of an Oakeshott Type XII blade, that transitional blade from a blade that was primarily a cutter to one that could be used effectively for both cutting as its primary focus, but still could be used as a thruster on its way to a sword which was going to be primarily a thruster moving forward. I think it's also a very good example of a Style X guard and a Type D pommel. The sword also comes with your choice of scabbard. It comes just with a plain leather scabbard. It's a wood scabbard wrapped in leather, or it comes with the fancier integrated sword belt. The sword belt comes with instructions for use. It is a little bit different in how you use it. There's no buckle, but it's quite easy to use and quite stylish, as well as coming with care and usage instructions for how they recommend the sword to be used. Overall, as I said, this would be a great addition to your collection if you're looking for that transitional blade, an Oakeshott Style 12 blade. Thank you very much.